as apparent and as essential as it has ever been. But what we see also in today's world is a society that is able and capable of spreading this beyond all of our wildest fathoms and imaginations. We don't see why in a society that can afford to spread all this knowledge for the betterment of our global community, why this must be hoarded up and kept for people who own this idea, and I'll talk about why that term doesn't exactly stand today, which is why we're proposing this motion. This House believes that the free sharing of copyrighted information should be tolerated. Before we get into the constructed material here for side government, I'd like to clarify what we're talking about here with some models and definitions of the terms today. So when we're talking about this House, we're talking about the nations of the world. And by free sharing, we're talking about the administering of information and the accepting of information. Note that we are not talking about plagiarism. We aren't just saying that you can, copy someone's work. We're saying a work is recognized as copyrighted, and you can spread that to whoever you want when you get access to it, whether that be over the web, hard copies, whatever. When we're talking about copyrighted info, we're talking about knowledge or research that someone has discovered and is declaring ownership of. Again, we're not talking about media or songs. We're not talking downloading movie and sending it to your friend. We're talking about concepts, ideas, knowledge, research, papers, those types of things. And when we're talking about tolerating, we recognize that this is a belief debate. We're talking mostly about principle here. And while we think that policy backing this motion is justified, we're just setting out to prove essentially two main things. One, that the sharing of copyrighted information is morally justified, and two, that the sharing of copyrighted information is beneficial to society. So now that we've clarified what we're going to be talking about here today, Madam Speaker, I'd like to get into the constructed case for side government. We have 3 points that we're going to be bringing to you. One, I'm going to be talking about the flaws of owning knowledge. Secondly, I'm going to be talking about the benefits to society. And my partner, there, is going to close up the front half with talking about the value of innovation, analyzing this from the idea of the innovators and idea generators of our society. So let's get into this idea of owning knowledge, because we actually think this is a really flawed concept coming out of the status quo. We think that copyrighted information of something that someone owns, understandable, but knowledge is distinctly different from a sort of product, Mr. Speaker, or Madam Speaker. We'd say that knowledge is something that advances the human race. The idea of knowledge is something that is collectively built upon and is evolutionary throughout the human species. And we'd say that the reason that this is so important is because knowledge is not solely kept to someone, and is not a person, is not completely independent to themselves. Everyone contributes to the global base of knowledge, and this is really significant because the global base of knowledge is what moves the general society forward. We like to talk about medicine here for a second. Medicine is not just one person starts the field of medicine and then they die and start a whole other field of medicine. What happens with medicine is we have innovations happen, and then when that set of innovations by one person stops, cool, another person picks up the stride and keeps on going. So we'd see this collective database and library of knowledge that this world is accumulating. So what is the problem here? I'll actually take you in a moment. What is the problem here when we have a society that likes to hoard up the information that we collected that is so essential to the entire humanity moving forward? We'd say that when you limit the spread of that, principally you are stopping humanity moving forward on a very profound scale. If we have someone who's limiting the spread of information just because they want their due credit or they want their pay or whatever, we'd say that that does not override the need for society to be more enlightened and to gain the benefits of the knowledge that I'll be talking about more so in the second point. Would you not agree?
How do you think this affects the number and diversity of original ideas that are new in the world?
I actually say it benefits it a lot. I'm going to be talking about that in a second when Oliver's going to be talking about that a lot as well. But what we would say is that when you have ideas cataloged and advancing on one another, holding up ideas and making people think independently isn't necessarily the best way to have ideas generated forward. Which is why group work, even between two necessarily, if you have one really, really smart person and two averagely smart people, there's a reason that those two averagely smart people can come together and create better ideas than that one really smart person. Because discourse, because the generation and circulation of ideas is something that sparks and moves knowledge in a way that allows it to develop at a rate that is far better than if it was just stagnant and held to one owner of this idea, not at this time. We'd say that the harms, the harms of keeping it private aren't something that we want to have in our society, because when you limit this the spreading of knowledge just because someone wants their due credit, it isn't necessarily, and my partner will talk about why that isn't even necessarily best for the innovator. But we're talking about society on a whole, and as the government, we think this is really profound. Because what we should be focusing on as a government, is what's best for our society. And we don't think that giving the benefit to the individual actors, more so than giving it to the whole, is the best thing that a government should be doing. When we can spread knowledge, we think that's best, and we want to see why side opposition is so opposed to a government that is like wanting to have this knowledge circulate. We need to see that come out really clearly in their constructive material. So I've talked about why owning knowledge is not a beneficial thing, because like when you own knowledge, you're hoarding it up for, it's hoarded up for one person, and it's limiting like the global database of knowledge being progressed. But I want to get into some more concrete benefits of this, like that I'm going to be establishing in this second point. So let's get on to the idea of benefits. We have like two main ones, one about principle, which I guess I'll go into first, and then I'll go into the practical. So like what happens when you have a society that spreads information? What happens when we have society that like gives information to one another? It's like candy or like general gossip. We think that like that society is one that accepts knowledge and gets knowledge, and we think that that is profoundly interesting and actually really beneficial. We think that like when you have a society that is limited, let's look at like generally the idea of societies that don't have something like the internet. The internet is spreading information that isn't necessarily copyrighted. It's just general information. It's the spread of information. But we'd say that like a place like the United States, who has the spread of information, like obviously through the internet, and places like third world countries where they don't necessarily have the spread of ideas. Like we'd say that there are a lot of other things that contribute to these these countries not being economic booms. But we'd say that like their lack of ability to get education, their lack of ability to get ideas, is something that is genuinely harmful. So like this isn't limited to copyrighted or not copyrighted information. We'd say that any information that you're not getting is information that is not helping you, information that is not allowing you to spark new ideas. We'd say that like copyrighted information is not anything super special. We'd say it just tried to be owned by one person. My partner will talk about why that's not good for them. We think for a society that's bad. We think that like when you have an engaged and informed populace, that is a society that's able to make the big changes, a society that's able to generate the great ideas, and able to like add on to the chronicling of knowledge that we see that's so important in our society. But let's talk about the second one. This idea of generating competition. We think this is really important. We think that when syphilis medication was like getting started up, like the people who were starting this idea, like they kept the information for themselves and like wanted to innovate these types of things. Like that's cool. You want to like protect yourself. Cool. But what happens then is like medical companies aren't able to build on the research of one company because they want to hoard it. We don't think that in a system where you're trying to spread knowledge and spread information, it's good for you to keep something that prevents the greater good from being advanced. We'd say that like when these vaccinations, like when everyone was able to learn more about it, more like better ideas and medications were able to be administered, this is able to help society.
The past 50 or 60 years has been an era of a lot of conversation and a lot of experimentation with different ideas. But we see that over the past 50 or 60 years, one half of the world, the Western world, has experienced the fastest and most rapid development and growth in the history of this world. We see the reason that they experienced this growth was because people actually had a reason to have ideas. People actually had a reason to care, to make something new. And we think if we listen to the ideas of side proposition, we will no longer have that incentive. And it's on that basis that we're proud to oppose this resolution. Now on this side of the House, we think for us to really take this debate today, we're essentially going to prove two main things. First, we're going to prove that not only do copyrights being violated is immoral, but then we're going to prove that it would actually ultimately hurt everybody in society. We're going to do that with three main points of contention. First, we're going to talk about why copyrights are the safeguards of society. Second, we're going to talk about why it's morally wrong. And third, my partner Moloch is going to talk about some further harms. But before we go into that, let's just go to some rebuttal of everything that came out of proposition so far. So the first thing they said is nobody can really own knowledge. They said knowledge is something that absolutely everyone should have. The knowledge to how to cure a certain disease, the knowledge to how to do a certain mathematical equation should absolutely become everybody's. First of all, no thank you. We think that knowledge is actually a product because knowledge is used to make products. Knowledge is used to make money from products, so we think that was false. But beyond that, we think they're living in a very utopian society. In a society where everybody just wants what's best for society. Everybody just wants everybody to be happy at once. We think although that may sound that's a fact of life, that's a fact that we simply have to accept, that they're not willing to. No thank you. Then they talk about the benefits of society. They talk about how more ideas get exchanged. And this was essentially the first thing as their first point. They just said two things again. But again, we think, here's an example. We look at communism. There was a lot of time for people to share ideas. The government owned all the ideas, so there was potential that everybody could have it. So if that kind of society sort of existed in communism, why is it that the best car that came out of the Soviet Union broke down after 2 kilometers of driving it? We think ultimately, communism did not work because it did not incentivize innovation, because it did not allow ideas to spread, and we think that's something that they have not understood.
So you think that like no bad ideas have ever come out of a society where like copyrights have been in place? You think that like these are all perfect ideas?
We're not saying no bad ideas have ever come out. We're saying a lot of good ideas have also come out. It seems like out of areas where innovation does not happen, the only thing that comes out is bad ideas. We see that people have good ideas and bad ideas. That's the point of discourse. We want that conversation. We completely reject the premise of that HOE. Then he talked about how this generates competition. Because only if one person can't afford it, a lot of people can use it. We think that's just false. We think this actually destroys competition. When you can't make money off something, why would you want to do it? We think when we present an inherent benefit to a certain action, more people want to get involved with that action. More people want to get into the process. We think that's something that they did not understand. No thank you. Okay, so with that said, let's move on to our actual constructive material. So the first one, let's talk about how copyrights are the safeguards of society. Let's talk about this idea of incentives. We think ultimately, like I already said, people are simply cynical. People want to make money. We think that's an absolute fact of life that you can't deny. Sure.
What do you think is most important to a human being? Dying with a bunch of riches they can't take into the afterlife, or memory and a legacy that comes from the spread of your ideas and being remembered for that?
We think the only people that can have a memory is if you're on the caliber of, say, Albert Einstein or Thomas Edison. We think the majority of people in society who innovate, the majority of the people who change things aren't Albert Einstein. They don't have that amount of recognition. We think we want to provide recognition for not those who are genius, but all people who have ideas. So let's continue. Let's talk about incentives. So we think people are very cynical. We think a lot of people's goal in life is actually to make a lot of money. So we think what would essentially happen when we don't allow this to happen, we'd actually not have that incentive be there. So an example of that would be in medicine. We'd say if nobody can make any money from developing a new product, we think that there are a few people who may be good Samaritans and will, but we think the majority of people just won't care anymore, and we think that'd be a huge issue. We think a lot of people would actually get hurt because these medicinal developments won't be created. And so what they said about how only one person had it, or what they will say to only one person has it, so it can't be given to everybody. We think when a company develops something, they make a lot of money off it, and eventually it does get integrated into society. But we think nobody will make that thing in the first place if there's no option for profit. No thank you. Second of all, let's talk about how it incentivizes improving ideas. We think when you have an idea, and you can just take it away, you don't need to copyright it, you don't need to protect it. The company can just take that and continue to sell that. But we think when there's a copyright, you actually have to improve on current ideas and make them better in order to be better. That creates an idea of competition. That creates an idea of you can't just take an idea and resell it. You actually have to improve upon it, you actually have to make it better. No thank you. So let's move on to the second point on how it's morally unjustified. So we think these people, these doctors, these scientists, they actually work very, very hard for the things they do. They go to university for, say, 10, maybe 20 years, and through all that, through all the research they do, they come up with their final answer. And we think it's absolutely wrong and morally unjustified not to give them the benefits that they deserve. We think the society that we live in is a promise of meritocracy, and that leads perfectly to the second subpoint, which is government responsibility. We think the very foundations of Western society have been based upon meritocracy, upon the idea that if you're smarter, if you work harder, if you have better ideas, you deserve to go farther in life. We think that takes away from that. That tells you, we don't care you're smarter, that guy can still copy your idea. Your idea is still going to be worth nothing because everybody's going to have access to it, and we don't think that's fair. We think in a meritocracy, in a society that we want to call actually fair, that those who are smarter, those who work harder benefit, we think in that type of society, we cannot have people sharing everybody's ideas at once. So what have I really talked about today? I think we pretty thoroughly debunked everything that came out of proposition so far. We talked to you about how if you don't have these safeguards of innovation, innovation simply won't happen. all, we talk to you about how in a meritocracy you should be benefited and you should benefit from being smarter, from being more hardworking. We think that's the case that stands. We think this resolution is
I now call upon the second speaker of the British government to make his remarks.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So we see a side opposition that's clearly come up here, and they've shown you that they fail to understand the difference between building on other people's information and copying other people's information. I'm going to further prove that distinction today through my point of the value in innovation. I'm going to get into in-depth rebuttal of the 2 points brought up by side opposition, and I'm going to be building my primary point showing that they haven't adequately been addressed. So, on to refutation. Their first point was about the safeguards to society. They talked about incentives, how people want money, and that people can only be a legacy if you're at the top. What we say to that is a couple things. First off, we feel that it's easier to get to the top if you have a plethora of information at your fingertips to build on, to help boost your own innovation and help it move. So that if you work as a cohesive unit, as Jacob Kimberly talked about, it's much easier to make that progression because because knowledge as a group is much more valuable and much more it's much better than knowledge in one individual. We also see that people care about their memory, right? People want to be remembered for what they do, right? Albert Einstein isn't remembered for the money he made, if he even made any. He's remembered for E equals MC squared, right? But they also came up here and talked about how the majority of people won't care about medical developments. What we say to that is like, people who are doctors in Canada, where they don't make as much money as doctors in the United States, are still doctors, even though it's a public healthcare system, because they care about being doctors. They want to make a difference. Because it's the same thing, right? People devote their lives to science and medicine because they care about science and medicine. If you hated what you're doing every day and you just do it for the money, that sucks, right? We feel like people don't do that. People do things because they're genuinely interested in doing certain things. We feel that won't actually stop. And they even said the majority of people don't make it to the top, they don't even make money. And people know they're not going to make money, but they still do the research anyways because they care. They want to try and make that difference. We feel that's still going to exist. People are still going to care, and people are still going to want to make that difference. They also came up here and talked about how copywriting creates competition, how that helps. We say that by taking away copywriting, you're able to, like I said, have all of information at your fingertips and help build. So that is what builds innovation. That is what builds a progression in society. The second point was about moral learning. Thank you, and that takes away from science and education. What we feel on our side is that we don't have to talk about morals. We feel it's morally wrong to withhold information that could potentially save lives and cure cancer, Mr. Speaker. Right? And so you feel that's what's morally wrong. Feel like if you have the ability to cure cancer and you're just waiting on it because you don't release information to help other science so that other scientists can help build on your idea, which could potentially make such a positive impact. I feel like that's what's wrong. No, thank you. They also talked about meritocracy. But we also want to say that is that these people aren't stealing ideas. I'm not going to go steal Jake's idea. I'm just going to build on it. I feel there's a distinct difference, and they fail to understand that. I'm going to get into my third thing. Yeah.
So, do you think these people who build on those ideas have the same vision as the original creator had for this project?
We see that, no, they don't. We feel different perspectives that would actually help make society progress. We feel that having a different opinions, different perspectives, and different outlooks would actually help innovations grow, would actually help spark progression. We feel that having one narrow-minded opinion and perspective is what stalls progression and innovation. We feel that what our model will actually spark it because of the unique perspectives that I've brought through on building information. The third point that we're talking about, the third constructive point of analysis, is on the value innovation. We feel generating ideas is extremely important. We also feel that people will still innovate. This is still from the perspective of the innovators, right? We feel like, as they said, they think side opposition, that it's all about incentive, that it's all about the money. But they admitted the fact that people know that they're all not going to make money, yet they still do it. We say that that's fundamentally true, right? like for thinkers and innovators, it's important for them to leave a legacy. We feel like just if you're able to cure cancer, or you're part of the building blocks that help cure cancer, that's a legacy. We feel that you can only get to that certain stage if you have the different perspectives, if you have the different opinions, and that you'd be remembered for the impact and significance. That's what they care about, right? We talked about how not everyone makes money, but they still do what they do because they want to make that impact. I feel like that's what they care about. Right? Psy didn't make billions of dollars on his video, on like the gaming style video, but like because there was no copyright on it, he allowed people to make remixes, he allowed people to download it, and that's why it grew to what it was, right? Yeah, fun fact, gaming style wasn't copyrighted, right? So like people build off what you discover, right? The cure for cancer, the guy who cures cancer is what he'll be remembered for, not the amount of money he made. So that people care, who want to give the best sense of recognition to these people. The current model puts it all in their mind, puts the notion in their mind that it's all about protecting their idea and ensuring that someone doesn't steal it. With our model, we see that it's about spreading the idea and working as a cohesive unit to help build towards a positive solution. No, thank you. I'm going to get into rebuilding what Virgilio came up here and talked to you today. He talked about the owning of knowledge, how knowledge advances human race, it's not independent to one person, how, for example, medicine takes building blocks, right? Like after every innovator dies, we don't restart the whole research in medicine, right? People build on one another, people build on the advantage of one another. We feel that our model helps that, right? We feel that pay doesn't override social advancement. Just because one person can make millions of dollars doesn't mean we should value that over saving millions of lives of the people who die of cancer every year. We feel that the harms in this resolution are that it limits the spread of knowledge. In response to that, there's about how we aren't living in a utopian society, it's not a reality. I feel like I came up here and I disproved that by saying that there are people out there who make advancements, who work and devote their lives to making advancements, even though they don't get that recognition, even though they don't make that money. We feel that people do still care. We feel that they undermine the values like human compassion and they want to make a difference in society. We feel that that's wrong. We feel that we believe in a more ethical human society. The second point was about the benefits of circulation of knowledge. We talked about the principal benefits and practical benefits, how we're sharing knowledge and that's good, and how building blocks are important for advancements. In response, they talked about how it destroys competition. We don't feel that it wouldn't destroy competition. We feel that we would unite scientists, we would unite innovators to work together and work as a cohesive unit. I feel that that's extremely important because, as I said, they're willing to do that. They're not just there for the payday, they're there to make a difference. And by this resolution passing, we're enabling them to make that difference, to work together, and to work with each other to achieve the goals they want, right? So for the reason that I've given, we are proud to propose.
Thank you. I now call upon the second speaker of first opposition to the order.
One primary thing we saw lacking from the proposition side of the House today was that they didn't define a need for the resolution. In a world where we already see innovation, in a world where we already see pharmaceutical advancements, why do we need the free sharing of copyrighted information? We have brought forward harms. I'm going to prove to you in the speech today that the harms outweigh the benefits, and I'm going to be proving that and much more. And I'm also going to be bringing forward the third constructive point of the opposition side today about harms to society. But before I do that, I want to go into thorough rebuttal of what we have heard from the proposition side. The first point we heard, owning knowledge. They said knowledge advances the human race, and what they want to do is prevent the hoarding of information. We think actually the resolution today will only increase the hoarding of information because now we have the free sharing of that information. Because now companies are going to be even more careful to keep that information safe because if it ever gets out, it's going to be given to every other company, all of their competition and all of the people, and the companies know they will be losing that money. The artists and industries know they will be losing that money. This will increase the hoarding of information. Now, thank you. Let's talk about the second point they brought forward, about the benefits to society, the lack of ability to get ideas, how there's no internet and stuff like that. Well, let's talk about the incentive to do things. So let's just analyze quickly when certain artists or when certain industries are incentivized to do things. We think they aren't incentivized when there's no profit factor. We think the majority of industries, the majority of companies are mostly incentivized to do things because they know they're going to be getting money. But when we now legitimize things like piracy because it's okay to give free movies or free books or things like that to other people, this disincentivizes companies in these societies that you want to have like more books and stuff like that because they know that they won't be getting the money to do this. We now know publishing companies will be so much more careful and that they will hoard more information and they will do less things to advance these societies.
So, like we've established like quite clearly in a lot of our points today, like we see the need in a society where like any information is hoarded, that like we do need to like disclose more information. Like, don't you think any information that isn't spread is bad?
Well, I think that once again, this will, as I just said in my whole about, this will increase the hoarding of information, but moreover, we would say that this is more of a harm to the people. And we would say that right now, we already don't see like society, we already see a lot of information being given to people. No, thank you. We already see right now in our society no hoarding of a lot of information. If there is a cure for cancer, companies will give it because they know they'll make billions of dollars off of it. We don't know why they would hoard it in our society. We see that as a huge flaw in your case today. Now we have a second response to this. We would say, like, on a moral basis, people have rights to their ideas, right? If they think of something, why should they not be able to have a right to what they do with that idea? Because we would, the same way people have a right to their body, the same way people have rights in our society, they have a right to the ideas that they come up with. And as you just said, well, there's so many people out there that are good Samaritan, they want to do it for the legacy, then why wouldn't they just do it under the status quo? Why wouldn't they give this great idea that's going to help advance society because they have a great legacy they want to uphold? Now you talk about generating competition, and thank you. You talked about, syphilis medications and stuff like that. When we say we have to really ask the question, will pharmaceutical companies in our world really be incentivized to now give more medicine? We don't think so, and we think that's that harms society. I'll be elaborating more on that in my point. The third point we heard, the value of innovation, and that people still do it even if it's not for money. We think companies that are leading right now in their industry, within companies that already have a lot of copyrighted information that are doing great in our society, won't be incentivized to innovate because they're already making so much money and because they don't want their competition to get stronger off their ideas. So once again, we would say that's even more important. The last thing we heard, info builds up on each other. We would say that the roots of this information are stepped upon, that the free sharing of it makes the roots of this information which is supposed to be built upon gone, because now we don't have that information going on. Let's move into some brief reconstruction. The first point we heard, the safeguards. Now we heard two things to this. One, they said legacy. We say that CEOs of pharmaceutical companies aren't really worrying about their legacy, they're worrying about making profit. Moreover, we would say artists in our world still need to make a living, and if they're not making the money, they will not go into that profession. Oh, thank you. The second thing we heard, people want to make a difference because they're good people. We would say innovators, inventors, scientists, they don't have the equipment to really make important innovations. They still need companies' equipment, and they still need companies to do that. The second point we brought forward is that it was morally unjustifiable. We would say, and they said that it's morally wrong to hold stuff that helps society. We said that they're really about the basis of our point. What about the harms to artists that are just trying to make a living, but now because of this free sharing information, they're not making their money? We think on a moral basis where a government does this to protect professions, protect society, we don't know why it's morally justifiable to take that. Now, I'm going to move to my constructive point, now thank you, about harms to society. Now, we heard Arslan come forward and talk a lot about harms to artists, but really, let's talk about really harms to industries. We think right now we see cases of piracy. We see cases of people pirating movies. We see cases of people not pirating books, but like selling books or like giving it away for free. We think this is harmful to artists, but moreover, this free sharing of copyrighted information, the harm is that it's free. The harm to industries is that the industries aren't getting the money. We brought forward a whole bunch of harms about how it disincentivizes them, but we quickly question on a moral basis, why is it okay to harm industries? Insofar that we have said industries are allowed to operate primarily because they're industries and we said, okay, it's okay for you to make profit, where is the government's place to then intervene into these industries' businesses and allow free sharing of copyrighted information to harm them? No, thank you. With the knowledge that so we would say that ultimately that all this harms society because what's the importance of copyrighted information to society before you look at it?
So why are we allowing a company to make a profit at the expense of humanity? Like it's not justified to let them make money when they're hoarding information.
Okay, we have companies right now, and what we say is firstly, companies aren't hoarding the information, companies are giving it to society because they make profit off that information. Moreover, we say companies have a right to do what companies have a right to the information or the ideas that they have. We as a government have intervened into companies' businesses, disincentivizes them, harms them, and harms society in the long run. We think your whole proposition is more harmful. Moreover, we would say that, what's the importance of really culture? What's the importance of music, literature, movies? It all builds up culture. It all builds up different cultures in our society. When we take that away, it ultimately harms society. Right now, when we see in a media age, Shakespeare's literature, say, is becoming more of a burden than actually a learning or actually part of our history, we would say it's important to preserve this. Moreover, it's important to advance literature in our society that defines our culture right now. It's important that different cultures and different countries and different nations right now define our current age through things through information that is mostly copyrighted. Take that away, you harm society's advancement. We would say on that basis, we are very proud to oppose the case today.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. First half of the debate has been about one thing only. Basically, the vision you have on humanity. Either way, you go with the capitalist vision, absolutely capitalist on one side, or the Good Samaritan vision on the other side, right? And what we believe it was necessary for a team to win this debate is to actually engage the other teams within their paradigm of humanity. Because right now, for you as a judge, you're just like, which I think is more believable. What we, as second proposition, are going to do is actually going to debate within their capitalist paradigm. We're going to study it out, show you the flaws within their reasoning. We're going to show that even in their paradigm, we would still win this debate. By that, we say we would win this debate. Alright, so I'm going to do a couple of things, right? First a little bit of rebuttal, then I'm going to continue about showing how the vision first op is given you about capitalist incentives is completely flawed, it's very unnuanced, not how it actually works in society. Secondly, I'm going to show you really why it is because of the nuanced vision I'm going to show you about capitalist society, it is actually morally right on two accounts why this should be allowed in the first place. First, couple points before, right? We got one challenge from opening opposition that says they have not shown us any need for this resolution. Well, generally we believe that just having our government stop at the idiotic attempt to control the internet is need enough for this resolution. Ladies and gentlemen, they're trying very hard to control it, it's not working, let's just stop, let's just accept the situation because we believe the situation is beneficial in the first place. We're going to prove that to you in this case. Then, actually they had one gigantic point, right? One premise their entire case of first opposition rests upon is the fact that people will not do anything, or companies will not do anything, unless there's money in it, right? That's their paradigm of humanity. I'm going to destroy it right now, basically destroying their entire case with it, right? So basically, what's wrong about this premise, right? They say the moment something is free on the internet, they can make no profit whatsoever. That's not true. We see that as first prop that define it, for instance, you see with scientific things, there's already like a subsidy on these things, right? Especially in Western Europe, you have like government subsidies that actually make university work feasible, actually pays for the scientists and the scholars to make those books. Secondly, people actually still pay to have paper books because some people actually like paper books beyond a digital version. Thirdly, people still keep getting paid a lot in the scientific circuit for lectures and things like that. So there's still money, right? A bit less money, but still enough money to produce all those things that are still right now in the status quo on the internet, right? That's the one thing they haven't dealt with, right? In the status quo, under their system, nothing would be produced because the internet is already giving all of these things out for free. Yet they are still being produced because of what the mechanism I explained right now. Same goes for what wasn't really part of the definition, but about the industries and the movies. They still make money from concerts, from cinema experience that you can't replicate on the internet, right? From actually still DVDs for people who actually like to build up a DVD collection, right? They still make a lot of money as that, like, now they have maybe a bit smaller private jet rather than a larger private jet. They're still filthy rich. There's still enough capitalist incentive in that case, right? So that pretty much destroys their entire case, right? Even like, yes, people would still pay for the cure for cancer, probably at first, like, and even after that you still get like, because your company invented the cure for cancer, you have a good reputation, people invest in your company because they think you're profitable, they think you're doing something good, you get more investors, there is actually within a capitalist economy all those things, right? So basically, that's, as part of my brother was also like my first argument, exactly the same part, right? We still see that Their capitalist incentive doesn't work in an absolute form. There are many other forms in society that allows you to invest, that makes it profitable. So even when people are not good Samaritans, as first proposition says, we probably believe it's probably like a balance between two of them, we still win this debate because we see in the status quo they're still producing these things because of the analysis I just given you. Right? That is pretty much the first opposition. Alright, continuing on to my constructive about morality, right? This is a belief motion. Why do you believe that it's actually morally right for our government to say, let's just stop controlling the internet? Well, they can't do it in the first place, right? Effectivity. But secondly, they shouldn't be doing it. Second, 2 points. One, we say, if we're going to focus on those property rights, first opposition talked about, right? They say, no, it's very unfair we're stealing them because they have property rights on those things. Actually, we say property rights on this intellectual level are very strangely interpreted. Because what we see is this. We see that, for instance, a scholar is able to produce these things because he has like either government subsidies like in Western Europe or private subsidies like in the United States, right? So he's actually capable of doing things because other people subsidize him. Now, normally in the economic system, you would say, yes, you invest in a company, that company makes a profit, you get a return investment, you get your profit out of it. But in the ideal world, like intellectual property, right, we say, yes, we invest in your property, and certainly, when society invests in you, but after you invent the ID, then suddenly society has to pay again for it to use that ID. We think that's like paying twice for the same thing. We think that's not very morally right. We say society pays for this in the first place to be able to use it, to be able to like create society because society pays for it because we believe it's valuable. We believe increasing both our scientific and our cultural knowledge is a good thing. That's why we subsidize it. That's why we believe because we pay for it in the first place, society actually owns it. Let society use it. That's how property rights work. Right? So that's like the first moral point about things. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, what you don't understand is a lot of authors go through publishing companies to get their book published. The publishing companies realize that these books, this is going to be a free sharing of copyrighted information.
Yeah, thank you on that one. I already explained that before. People still prefer paper books to the digital version, right? So we still see that, we don't see that many publishers going bankrupt right now in status quo. Personally, I have a huge book collection because I really like paper books. I really hate looking at a screen. There are many people who believe the same thing. If your logic was true, status quo would not produce any books. We see it differently, our analysis. Alright, continuing to my last point, right? The second point about morality. Because what we also believe is a good thing is social equality, right? And what we see in society right now is that there is a huge difference between the rich and the poor. Where the rich can actually afford to educate themselves, right? To buy all these books, to buy all these knowledge and IDs. The result is this. The rich get an education, get good education, and actually go to Harvard, go to Ivy League colleges, and as a result are more successful in life, right? We believe that discrepancy that already existed in money in the case that in status quo like before the internet, that the poor were not able to develop themselves, that even when they're smart, without education, like the cure for cancer could be trapped in the head of somebody without education, right? Many much of quotes. So if first opposition says meritocracy is important, they should agree with us that everybody should get the same chance at education, right? And that is why we believe that, well, we see it after the coming of the internet, right? After the coming of all this free information, we see it's much more easy for people to get everything they want. They're not just like the full information where Wikipedia isn't everything anymore. Everybody now has access to scientific things, good methods, can actually shape themselves. So because of this, because we actually say property rights are on our side, we say social equality is on our side, and because economic incentive in the capitalist world is also on our side, that brings the question opposition, vote second proposition.
Capitalism isn't black and white. It's more like 50 Shades of Grey. And in my speech today, I'm going to try to show a realistic view of how business actually works. How is information used in terms of innovation, and how does the economy actually work? We think that both sides, we think that both teams so far have completely failed. We think that they haven't given a nuanced world of how the view of how the world actually works. So in my extension, I'll be talking about information in different business models. And secondly, I'm going to be talking about the need for informational control mechanisms. Why we need to have control over certain ideas. But before that, I'm just going to go into some quick rebuttal about something the previous speaker said. He came up here and talked about education and, social equality. Like, let me just give you a news flash. MIT and Harvard lectures are already free online on YouTube, trying out loud. Like, you can already get all the course materials for every single course in MIT for free, fully accessible. This has nothing to do with motion. Please, next speaker, deal with the actual motion. So yeah, moving on to this first idea, like information different business models. Like, we think that the world isn't, it's not like, okay, we want to hoard information while they want to share information. We think that different businesses use different models because, they have different, motivations, right? Some businesses might want to use open source to basically develop, certain ideas, and then, get maybe crowdfunding to, actually, get these ideas out there. Some companies might want to rent out copyrighted information to, young entrepreneurs who might want to try it out. Thereby, they sell the idea, the entrepreneur does something with it, and they pay a certain royalty. Some companies might want to sell the idea because that's maybe what they do. Maybe they spend, years developing ideas, thereby, selling that to people who can actually make it happen. And then we have companies that might want to keep it because they have a vision of how that idea is supposed to be used. I mean, I'm going to be talking about the dangers later on, but basically what we're saying is, like, some companies might want to keep it and develop these ideas on their own because they might have a profit incentive, and we think that the first half has already dealt with that adequately. So another thing that I'm just going to point out here is, and I think this might be an important fact, copyrights aren't permanent. They run out eventually. Like, it depends on, which type of copyright it is. Like, some run out after 20 years, some 50. I mean, Disney, cartoons, they're going to run out in roughly 4 years. Then every single Disney character that was copyrighted, they're pretty much going to be, open. So it's not all good in that sense. Anyways, like, in terms of, like, these different systems of using it, like, we think that every single one of them has a benefit, and they all exist. Like, and we think that industries and different businesses adapt to the ones that work the best. And, like, we don't, like, obviously, some, like, type of information will probably be shared because it's more reasonable to do so. Like, unless they can actually give us a reason as to, why on a whole, all type of information should be shared, like, no, like, we don't see that. But yeah, okay.
If any information is not spread to the public, that is some information that they cannot build off of. Don't you think that that, like, in itself is a flaw in your system?
Actually, we think it's a good thing, because in some cases, people take that information and they use it for, like, evil purposes. I'm going to be talking about, like, literally, like, what happens when we have a pharmaceutical company that has a new drug in development, like a formula for a new drug. But then we have this, sneaky person who comes up and, oh, I see that recipe for that, drug. Like, I'll just take it. Screw, testing. I'll just develop it and just sell it in, like, third world country. Great, now we have harms there. Like, I'm just saying, like, these things happen. So now, moving on to this idea of the need for informational mechanisms, right? Plagiarism will happen. We think it's naive of their side to think that plagiarism won't happen. We think that if you have access to someone else's ideas, you will probably try to steal that. For instance, like, I'm pretty good at making cookies, right? Like, if I have a recipe here on the, table, I'm pretty sure that, opening side will probably want to look at it and make those cookies themselves because, it's all good, right? Like, we think that by removing, corporate protection in this sense, we're pretty much harming loads of industries, right? We're harming the innovation industry. We're harming, like, companies that are pretty much, driving the world right now. Like, we've seen that the Western world has transitioned from an industrial, like, economy to an informational economy. And we think this is extremely important, right? The thing is, like, we've seen a, like, extreme shift to digitization, okay? Like, a few years ago, this, like, you would have to have a phone, you would have to have a camera, you'd have to have a calendar, an almanac, whatever. Now it all exists in here. You know why? Because people created apps, people wanted money for those apps, and we think that's completely fine. Like, we think, now that we actually see that things are becoming more about idea-based things, we think that that actually makes ideas more valuable than just material goods. And, like, another thing is, like, in terms of dangerous spillovers, right? Like, we think that vision actually matters. Like, in terms of the pharmaceutical company that wants to test things before, and, like, and not share that information before it's actually safe for the public. And we think that's extremely important. But before I go on, yes, Jay. No, actually, no, second half.
Okay, as I explained in my extension, innovation is right now also subsidized from society by private investments and government investments. I did in my sense you didn't rebut that, and refute your entire case as you just said it.
I will take it, I will take it. Like literally, like what we see is that loads of companies pay universities to do research on things. Like we think that's completely fine. Like we think that universities deserve some type of funding. In many cases this is, private funding, and we think that's completely fine. By having big corporations like, can actually use these ideas and provide a service or some kind of product, they actually get money to actually provide the funding. And we see a circle of innovation. We see, okay, here's the idea, here's the product, here's money. Oh, now you can make more ideas. We think that's good. In your case, you're pretty much removing that, funding. Like, sure, you can use some type of crowdsourcing, but that's probably not going to work in every case. So, no, your side does not win on that. Then we have this, dangerous tech. Like, for instance, what happens when we have 3D printing, right? We think that this is a horrendous problem. Like, what happens when we have 3D printed guns? Like, what if we have these designs, dangerous designs, aren't protected in any way, in terms of copyright or whatever? Like, we think that in that case, we see that the public has a possibility of creating some harm. Like, even when we have, nuclear reactor designs, I don't think the US government would actually want the Chinese to get its third generation nuclear reactors right now. And wait, are you communicating with the other team? That's kind of cheating. Okay, fair enough. Then, in terms of aerodynamics, any type of technology, we think that there's always a possibility of, in some case, misusing that information. We think that overall, vision matters, and, the person who creates the person who copyrights something probably also has a reason for doing that. So yeah. So because we think that we provided a more nuanced view of how that world actually works, how capitalism works, and the need as to why we need, some kind of control mechanisms, we cannot see how they win, and we take the debate.
Thank you. I now call upon the government speaker for his speech.
We believe that investing in something and not getting anything back is really immoral, and we shouldn't allow that. That was one of the points of extension that Jeroen brought to you that wasn't reacted on by closing opposition. What I will do in this concluding speech is, after some rebuttal, I'll talk about two things. Firstly, I'll talk about will there be more or less innovation? Secondly, I will talk about morality and society. So first of all, some reaction to what we heard from closing opposition. We say, first of all, they had a slightly more nuanced vision on this motion, which doesn't mean that the points that Jeroen brought you don't apply to their case. But there are several other points that they brought up. First of all, they told you copyright runs out, so it's no problem. We say, first of all, when copyright runs out after I've died, I don't have much use for the information that I have. Secondly, if you have to wait for decades before you can actually access the information, you have old information and you can't really use that. Right now, we don't think you have any use about that. Secondly, they said there can be some abuse by bad guys. Three reactions to that. Firstly, we say abuse always happens in all situations, and actually in the status quo we see we can simply not enforce this always checking on everything, so we don't see bad guys stop by that, so we don't really see that much of a difference. Secondly, they haven't really listened to the definition of opening government. Because what they have said, if you have plagiarism, that is not allowed, and you can still sue other people. You cannot present ideas of others as your own ideas. That's not what we're talking about in this debate. Thirdly, we see a lot of good effects, so even if there was some abuse, we say the good effects really balance that out, and the morality balances that out as well. So, that about their extension. I hope they will also talk about the mechanism that Jeroen brought you, the social equality point, and the morality. Finally, some rebuttal on that in the whole speech. No thanks. Okay, so going into my first clash. Will there be less or more innovation? What we've seen in the first half of this debate was kind of the two visions on humanity, right? Because what opening opposition told you, no, there will be no profit at all. So the only incentive people have is money, no one will innovate. We say a couple of reactions to that. First of all, the opening government reaction, who said people are not always about money, they have other reasons to do such things. Fine reaction, we see, but also in the world that they're proposing, we are right, as Jeroen explained. Because, first of all, we see actually in the status quo, when there's not checks on it, people still make money because of printed books, because of people wanting to get this information in other ways, paying for lectures, stuff like that. Secondly, we say they actually do make money because we're mainly talking about scientists who actually have a job. So they're paid for by the government, and the government says you have to do this research, and therefore we're giving you money. So we see that they still have money, perhaps slightly less money. We won't see that as such a big difference. No thank you. So we see there might actually be more innovation because there's a bigger audience that you have for everything you present, because also the poor can afford to read things you presented, or to watch, or to listen to whatever you made. We say the innovation point falls on our side. No thank you. So then on to the second clash about morality and society, which was a large part of Jeroen's extension. But what we first heard from open government is that they said, okay, people really don't own knowledge. And we haven't heard any reaction whatsoever from that, from opening of opposition, nor closing opposition, actually. So that still stands. No, thank you. But there was also some more deep analysis from on the morality point by Jeroen, which hasn't been responded to either. Because what we see is that the only reason that people, that scientists or that artists are able to develop the books they write, or to develop the art they make, is because they got the means to do so by society. Nothing. So we say, first of all, society paid for that because of the education system that wouldn't be there in an absolute free market if there would be no government who would be able to invest in the education system. I've never heard of any scientist who hadn't had any education whatsoever who came up with a brilliant idea. So what we see is that they needed actually those means that they got, that they needed this education, that they needed this subsidy to actually do the research they did, to write those books, to get to produce and write those books. So they had also the transfer of information from society to them in order to make that possible. If we have such a huge investment in those people, we say we want to see something back as society, and we don't want to pay for it a second time. We think that's really, really immoral, and they haven't responded to that yet. Hopefully that will be responded to in the whip speech, the second half.
Okay, so basically I explained why ideas are more important. Like literally we're moving from material goods to an information economy. That kind of shows that there's already a need to type those things. That's pretty much what our economy is based on. Please respond.
Sorry? I didn't get the first part.
Basically, we've seen a shift from material goods to an idea-based economy.
Yeah, we see an idea-based economy, so we see that we actually need those ideas. And if you need those ideas, you want to have those ideas as the first company, as the first innovator, that your name can actually be on that, because we're not supporting plagiarism, we're actually supporting to get those ideas out there in order to keep this economy running so that it actually falls on our side. Then, last point about social equality, which you can also explain. Because what they're supporting is that everyone has to pay for information that might be really relevant to poor people, for instance. And we say, if they can't really afford those things, if they have not a lot of money, they can't really afford those things. Because if you have to choose between buying food or buying some book, then the choice will be very easy for you. You're always needing the food, because that's the first need you have in society. So in order to get information, to get art, also to the lower classes in society who don't have that much money, we need the free spread of this information. And for all these reasons, please vote closing up.
I now call upon the final speaker in this debate,
property needs protection. Ideas do too. This is what we've been trying to explain to you on our side of the bench, and especially in our extension. Unfortunately, I still don't get the stance of the government on this issue. Firstly, they say, yes, these ideas are valuable, and then they go on and contradict themselves and show how these ideas should just be shared with no credit to be given to the people who create those ideas and who should get credit for it. For this reason, I'm going to go through 3 clashes in my speech that I saw in this debate. Firstly, who gets the credit, who deserves the credit, how do we deal with this situation of giving recognition to the people who deserve it. Secondly, whether we're driving society forward or backwards with implementing this motion. And thirdly, I will talk about the most important issue of this debate, which is the business model and how actually it works in the real world, and which part of this information we're actually talking about. That is the information that's copyrighted and not any kind of free information that everyone is allowed to anyway, which they talked about through most of their speeches, which we deem as irrelevant. Now, let's get into the first clash. We talk about who gets the credit. Their main example that they base this whole idea on, they're like, well, you know, when you create something really great like a cancer cure, the company who creates that will get the credit, of course. Yes, they will. We told you, firstly, the problem is only these big names get this credit. We're not only talking about these last steps of innovation, of creating the best things in the world. We're also talking about smaller innovations, smaller entrepreneurships, which we deem as equally important in some cases. And that's the first thing. And secondly, they agree that the company who creates the cure for cancer will get all the credit. We see that as problematic because a lot of companies have worked so hard to actually get to that point, and we think those companies should get a lot of credit. Those companies who have worked so hard for so many years to create the elements that create this cure should also get credit. No, thank you. This is something that will be ignored if this motion passes, ladies and gentlemen. Thirdly, they had this contradiction of, they said, well, money doesn't really matter because those people who create these things, they care more about the message, they care more about the legacy, they care more about their job. And then they went on and had a whole case about why money is important and it will be there. Now, we tell you, firstly, money is important because you need this incentive, and this was brilliantly pointed out by the opening team on our side. And secondly, we will create more hoarding of this kind of information if you apply this motion, which was also clarified. No, thank you. Now, going on to my second clash, which is driving society forward or backwards. We have a few points on this. No, thank you. So, firstly, we told you less people will probably choose this profession. If you're a musician, or if you're a young teenage person trying to figure out what you want to do with your life, and you feel a passion for music, and you know you're not going to make any money of it, you're probably going to look more into doing something else, which is not your passion, and we believe when something is your passion, you create more, you're more creative, you're more beneficial to society. Secondly, we told you there's a lot of potential for abuse within this. No, thank you. We told you that this can be dangerous when you allow people who didn't have the original vision of the product to continue building up on it and to continue promoting it. Because we give you 3 examples of military ideas that can be taken in a conflict playground. We told you about testing models of pharmaceutical companies that can be dangerous to use in their testing period. That's why the companies have the copyright, so they can take the responsibility if something goes wrong, so they have all the control, so these medicines don't hurt people. And we think it's dangerous to allow these to be freely shared. No, thank you. Thirdly, we told you about 3D guns. This is a problem that's rising in the whole world right now. We have 3D printing, and people are actually getting the blueprints for free. This kind of information is being freely shared, the blueprints for guns, and people are printing guns in their homes. And this makes it very hard to control gun ownership. No, thank you. So we think this vision actually matters. The vision that the people have already matters. The people who created the 3D printers, they were thinking about printing organs so they can save people from dying. They were thinking about creating tools, creating custom things so that people can have a better quality of life. They were not thinking of creating machines to kill people. So we think that this vision can be abused quite dangerously and should not be promoted as under their model. Now they told us, well, you know what, to create this much innovation and to get to that level, we have to build on each other's idea. Yeah, I can agree to some extent, because I can see how our extension did well on building up on other ideas, right? That's how it is in the BP forum. But I think this is not necessary, firstly, because they went in their root speech, what scientist has ever come up with something on their own, and it was great. Here's a couple names for you for some smartest people of the world. Isaac Newton came up with the whole calculus. when he was before he was 26, when he lived in a farm. So we think that this is probably a good example. Also, Thomas Edison is a person who made 10,000 experiments to create the light bulb. We think if someone just came when Thomas Edison was about 9,700 experiments and somebody just came and did 300, we think Thomas Edison should also get the credit because he worked so hard, because he kept this persistence, he kept going forward. After 9,000 experiments, he's still working for that, which we are thankful for him today. You wouldn't be able to see me otherwise because of my dark skin. So we go on to talk about the diversity that we will create to you. We think that diversity is important. When you create this kind of model, it's just, I'll take in a second. When you create this kind of model, you promote people to work on just building on ideas, and we see a lack of originality there. What we do on our side, which is the status quo, is we keep both open. If you feel like you want to build up on something, there's the open business, as we clarified to you in our business explanation. If you want to do something original, we would love for you to do that, but that's not very promoted under you. Wouldn't you agree? Anyway.
Okay, so you talked about, you said that we're only protecting the big guys, but what we're saying with this is if you give information to the little guys, they'll be able to help innovate big things like as well. Don't you think that that's important?
I don't think that's important, no. I think you're taking very small examples and taking information from somebody like Einstein or Newton or Stephen Hawking and giving it to a school graduate. The first thing we told you, okay, let me get to the third class because it clarifies it's very important, very well. So we told you there are different business models. This came in the extension. There are a lot of open source business. A lot of people are just opening that information and sharing it. So we think that kind of thing still happens in the status quo. So why do we need this motion if this still happens? So they told us, well, people are always willing to share this information. No, they're not. That's why we have the copyright. That's why it exists. The people who use the copyright are the people who refuse to share this information. That's basically what it means. You don't want to share information, you implement a copyright. So the people who are willing to share their information already do that in the open business model, so that happens today already. And so we think that an idea-based economy that we're shifting towards, which is what's happening today, and that's why we're debating this motion, should be considered. If the whole ideas in the world is shifting to ideas and digital world and everything like that, we think we should shift also and value that very much. And because we keep everything open, we keep the open business so that people can benefit from it, and we keep the original ideas, we think we should win. And because there is no need for implementing this motion, it falls. Thank you.